All right. I feel like I should be saying welcome back to myself, but I'm not going to do that. This is Together We Write, a mostly weekly stream of some live writing techniques that give us a little bit of insight into the wacky world of professional and technical writing. My name is Chris Perzicki, assistant professor of English here at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. In this weekly stream, I know I said a little bit of this already, but been a busy morning trying to get into the swing of things here. But today we're going to be talking a little bit about presentations and going to go through a few things. This is not going to be probably not going to be an hour long. I almost always say that, but take it how it comes. I want to cover a few things. Namely, most everyone surprisingly knows how to work with PowerPoint. In fact, we are working with it in class yesterday, and I heard students say something about how they hate PowerPoint, and I was like, boy, I don't usually hear that from anyone but seasoned professionals who are just sick of working with it all the time. And yeah, I get it. Microsoft tools, just in general, get a bad rap. They've always been somewhat remarkable for their, what's the word, um, crude, yet somehow overwhelmingly obtuse. I don't know how to describe it. It's always seems to have be simultaneously outdated and um, but remarkably solid for its functionality. There's a lot of things you can do with it. It's a great tool. I'm not sure why the Microsoft hate. I couldn't care less one way or the other. It's kind of like looking at the toolbox. Like I'm not quite sure if I care. You know, as long as it works, I'm pretty content with it, and I don't have to futz with it. Yeah, you can do that with Microsoft, but things are not too streamlined, very little cumbersome, but it does get the job done. And with um, Google Slides and Canva and other tools out there, I think Microsoft has amped it up a little bit. I know that they're looking at incorporating AI assistance into the platform, so which could be helpful. In fact, later on, I'll show a how you can use the function AI function in Bing to help generate your slides a little bit easier. Right. Although, I'm sorry, but when it comes to ChatGPT and the AI technology, I find myself doing almost as much work typing wise, although it does seem to alleviate some of the exhaustion involved with pre writing, I guess. So there's that. Anyway, so let's talk about presentations. First, I want to sort of go into just a broad overview of what we are looking for when we're talking about presentations. Now, I give a different version, slightly different version of this in my class, but it was cribbed from a open access presentation that was online from several years ago, and I think it's time to change it up. So I've removed a lot of the slides that sort of demonstrate bad examples. I think what I need to do is just head out there and actually find examples of bad slides to use rather than something that someone made up. Anyway, so oftentimes what we see in our in presentations, I see this a lot, are these walls of text. This massive, um, what do you call it? Paragraphs that have just been copied and pasted into the presentation without any sort of editing. Well, this is common for whatever reason, but and probably the most, I don't want to say offensive, that's a little bit strong, but I think what's important to keep in mind whenever you're putting together a presentation is that your rule of thumb, your mantra should be that the attention always be on you, the speaker, whoever the speaker is. I should not be compelled from the audience perspective to focus on the slides beyond a passing glance. Okay. And this can be a challenge because your responsibility as a presenter is to deliver the goods, right? You have a lot of information that you have to deliver. And when it comes to the text, it should provide a sort of structure, a skeleton, scaffold, whatever that will give the audience sort of like visual anchors or some mental cues that they can follow along with that can help. Okay, a little bit of a distraction um, is all right as long as it's almost like a respite. Like maintaining focus on any one thing for too long can be exhausting in itself. So, yeah, giving the audience something to look at, as a break from looking at the presenter, that's fantastic, very good. But having the audience focusing solely on the slides is going to be create issues. So as we go through, so I'm going to talk through this a little bit today. One of the you'll hear this over and over again. Okay, just the amount of distractions that people pack into their presentations is not just, I don't want to say unprofessional, because it happens so often. You would think it would be professional, but as we are thinking more about accommodating everyone in our audience, regardless of their capacity to see, hear, interact. We want to make sure that everyone who is in the room is able to engage with the presentation to the best of their abilities or comfort level, right? So when we're using text that's too small, we are eliminating the capacity for those with limited vision to engage with the presentation. So, I mean, obviously, without my glasses, I can't even see what's on the screen in front of me. However, we see it too often where you have text that, okay, this is, let's see what we got here. This is 32, okay, which 30 is a good starting point. If I were to, what I often see is 12 point. That's usually an indicator that the person has copy and pasted from their work, whatever their paper or their material they're presenting from. But even 18, 20, I see a lot of 20 and 24, but really get it up there. Okay, 32, 28 at the least. 30-point font is a good, but just the default in Word is 32. Okay, it is I think it's just a fundamental. If nothing else, this has to, it's something I remind students of at this point in the semester when they're working on their presentation slides. It has to be 30 point. This goes for if you're using an image and it has text in there, if at all possible, remove it or find something else. There should be no text on there that is illegible. Okay, it's distracting, it's unprofessional, and it doesn't need to be there. Right? Let's see. Oh, I just noticed that I didn't have a period on here too. These should be sentences. All right, so um, your slides, your let's say your how do you get away from those walls of text? Well, simply put, just emphasize the main points. This should be sort of like a series of guideposts that tells your audience where they are in that particular portion of the presentation. Okay. All right. So having enough points on there to fill a slide, so it's encapsulating a certain portion, topic, or subject. Okay, so we're not quite to multiple. We're not really talking about how many slides, but I usually say 1 to 2 per subject matter. Typically, one is ideal. Again, you want a very limited amount of information. We tend to put too much in there, myself included. I often find my presentations get longer and longer, and as I'm editing down. Usually, try to get for a 15-minute presentation. Try to get to about half that number, so 6, 7 slides at the most. Okay, if I can get away with it, and that includes your cover and your works cited slides as well. So. Again, not just for the audience, but also for the speaker, we tend to create slides that give us as speakers a little bit of um, I don't want to say a crutch, but it gives us this false impression that it gives the audience something else to pay attention to other than us. Unfortunately, if you're giving the presentation, that's just the nature of the beast. You want the all eyes on you as often as possible. So, a good rule of thumb is the 6x6 rule. All right, this will help keep things organized, maintained, and professional, and clean and concise. No more than 6 bullet points per slide, no more than 6 words per bullet point. Pretty straightforward. I'm sure there are plenty of um, other models to follow. I prefer this one. It just keeps things as simple as possible. All right, and as the instructor, it keeps the responsibility on me, or the presenter, it keeps the responsibility on me to make sure that I'm delivering orally the content that sort of fills in the blanks, right? Also, every once in a while, I'll put in images, not too often, only if necessary. I used to do this quite a bit. I would throw in a couple of cute little snarky images just to, I don't know, that's just my style, right? And I've gotten away from that a little bit too, just because, again, if there's going to be any sort of snark or humor or any sort of, I will put images in, but they're usually only background. Maybe if I don't have any particular um, verbiage or slides with text on them, I'll just put an image up there to just sort of give a backdrop for me, the presenter. That's usually, I'll do that for the first slide, somewhere in between for an intermission, any sort of discussion, Q&A, that type of thing. And then again, yeah, 30, but pictures are good. I mean, PowerPoint handles them well. It does increase the file size, so that's something to be aware of. You put too many images, videos, it's going to make your uh, file size enormous. Not quite sure why PowerPoint has not, unless it has, and I haven't noticed. But the PowerPoint slide decks seem to be enormous in size. So the bigger it is, the more room for error you introduce, especially when it comes to transporting information, uploading it, putting it on, presenting it, using it. Anyway, so next, we don't. We went through a phase early on, and I want to say it's been a while since we've seen this. especially since most of our tools come with preloaded templates or templates that you can buy, and it's really not too difficult to just use a black and white slide. It's not very interesting, but every once in a while you'll see someone who feels like getting creative. Um, we had a tool, it may still actually exist. I'll check it out later on. In fact, that might be another like part two. Prezi was sort of the everyone used Prezi for a few years there, and I think we've gotten away from that just because it was too. Anyway, well, I'm not going to get into it. But there's a lot of aesthetic choices that you make when you're putting your PowerPoint slides together. And so loud, garish colors, we want we hopefully are getting away from that mode of thinking where the slides have to be entertaining, right? They don't have to be entertaining. They're otherwise that's just a distraction. And so for those who are not coming from design backgrounds, throwing in bright RGB, red, green, and blue, these garish, loud colors, was um, awful. I should not have the impression of your slides on my eyes for 5 minutes after you've moved on, right? Any sort of text colors like yellow on green, blue on purple. Trying to think of some other ones. Orange on red. Really low contrast that fade into the background. Very difficult to read, especially those colorblind combinations: red and green, blue and yellow. These colors are not only garish and ugly, but for those who are colorblind, maybe even impossible to read. So you want to stick to a visual theme. Like I said, PowerPoint. Most of our tools come with fine templates. When it comes to efficiency, like if you're trying to demonstrate your PowerPoint savvy, then by all means do that and maybe move away from a theme, come up with something original. That's tends to be what I do if I have the time. Otherwise, black and white, black on yellow if you feel like it, something that's high contrast. Tend to avoid any sort of color combinations that could be misinterpreted as signifying anything than a color combination. You know, branding colors are exceptional. Good choice if especially if you're presenting on behalf of a company or for a company. Um, for my part, for what it's worth, black and white is usually the way I go. All right. Speaking of which, I mentioned fonts earlier, and I forgot to mention this. Notice that I'm using here a sans serif font. I not exactly even sure what this is, but it's something a sans serif versus a say Times New Roman, and maybe not a huge deal. But I tend to prefer sans serif fonts just because of the ease of readability. You can scan it quickly and move on. You're not necessarily even following along the text. Serif fonts created and used for print primarily to carry your eyes across the page, not necessarily what we want to be doing or need to do with a PowerPoint slide if it's presented up there. Think of your road signs. You can scan it quickly. You don't even have to really look at it, just out of the corner of your eyes, and you can read a pretty good, 3, 4 words driving by at 80 miles an hour. So notice I do have a couple of different fonts on here. This is the same font family, however. So rule of thumb used to say use no more than 2 fonts, maybe one with serifs, one without. I tend to just stick with one anymore. Two if for a longer piece, but for PowerPoint slides, just to keep things simple, right? And I will say, and one mistake I'm catching on here, that this I'm not sure if this is a typeface that comes with PowerPoint, so it may create issues if um, it may introduce. There's room for error that I'm introducing here if I have to, for whatever reason, upload this to a tool, say Google Slides, that does not have that font on there. So something I have to change. One thing we do see quite a bit, I mentioned this before, uh, overwhelming pictures are just not good. Um, GIFs, animations, videos. I mean, I even have a hard time when in a presentation someone starts watching a video. You only have a certain amount of time, especially in like a timed presentation. You don't be wasting time watching a 4 or 5 minute video clip. It better be really important and good, and very rarely is that the case. Same goes with images. If an image is in there, it should have some sort of purpose to it. Okay, um, they should not. They should provide a visual anchor for the audience. They can also provide you with, like I said earlier, a backdrop or something to stand even physically, but also rhetorically, you're standing up against, you're giving yourself a backdrop. Okay, so it provides context, but does not become the focus of attention. Now, with graphs and charts are a different matter, and I'll mention that in a second. Again, here we come again, start to come up against our other sort of rule of thumb. Keeping slides as simple as possible. Okay, there should be no reason where the slide is again distracting, but so keeping it simple will help maintain that. 1 to 2 pictures per slide. I've done a couple if I have to do sort of a comparison or a contrast, or for whatever reason, maybe I'm discussing something from that particular image, but otherwise no more than two. Charts are a different matter. Okay, when charts are used effectively, they are clear and they are simple. What we often see are, someone has done a report or some sort of text-based material where they have a very catchy graph, and they will copy and paste it directly into their presentation. Well, what often happens, however, is the font and the type and the design of that graph is often for a handheld screen or a desktop screen or even an 8.5 inch by 11 piece of paper. Well, what happens when you put that graph onto a PowerPoint slide, that text often becomes illegibly small. Okay, so uh, charts are fantastic. They're good visual cues. They're excellent ways of illustrating complex points, especially if you're going through a list of numbers. Much easier for me to scan a pie chart with from the audience than hearing about it. Okay. However, you have to make sure that text is large enough. Okay. If you've got a pie chart and you've got slices, of 10, 15%, make sure that 15, those labels are big and legible. 30-point font. Got to be able to see it. Otherwise, it's going to be distracting and look unprofessional. All right. Slide animation. The Not gonna worry about that too much. Okay, so again, you want to keep slides simple. If you do have any sort of slide transitions, in fact, I'm just doing it this way to avoid the fade in animation that I have in here. If I use any animation, it's going to be that. Again, I feel like this is a trend that is falling to the wayside, thankfully. But you do occasionally see presentations with things jumping out of the screen and jumping in and bounding out and all this other good stuff, or not so good stuff. All right. So, but if you got to do one, just one, it only if necessary. Okay. Again, a busy PowerPoint slide is going to completely distract, and not just the audience, but also the presenter. If you've got something flickering in the corner of your eyes, it's going to draw your attention like a moth to the flame. So do yourself a favor and avoid animations. All right, here we get into some other suggestions. And this is, your slides are great. You followed the 6x6 rule. They're wonderful. You're ready to go. You're giving your presentation, and sure enough, something goes wrong. Okay, so this happens. I don't think I've been to a conference or event where there was a presentation that something did not go wrong. Okay, I've seen everything from, formatting issues. You created the PowerPoint in or the slides in one tool and you tried to open it up in another tool. You forgot your adapter. Those are pretty common. I've seen it. The worst I've ever seen was someone who gave their presentation, opened their slides on their phone because the phone was not operating as a USB drive for whatever reason. Test your presentation. If at all possible, get it on the computer that's going to be used for the presentation. Make sure it works, uh, and then have backups. Okay, not just one, at least two. Uh, be ISO compliant. Why the heck not? Right? You've got one on your laptop, your own computer. You've got one on a jump drive and one in the cloud. Okay, several ways. You always have a backup. What happens if the internet goes down? What if the computer doesn't work? All of these, having those backup plans, uh, you know, you never, how does that saying go? You never know that you needed it until you do. I can't remember how it goes, but you don't want to ever be in that position where you look unprofessional because your PowerPoint slot, your slides aren't working for whatever reason. If at all possible, and this serves multiple purposes, print out some handouts. Okay, use the note view. I'll show that in a second. Make a little. Speaking of which, make a little note of that. Print out your slides for your audience. I would say I usually print off about half a dozen copies. Not only is this for in case all else fails, and I haven't gotten to the point where I've had to use it for because the slides weren't working, but I also like to give for those who may not have anything to write on, want to take notes, or for whatever reason can't see the slides, or um, maybe they're sitting in the back of the room and can't see behind someone's head, or whatever it is. Having those handouts can also be just another way of accessing that information. So if someone prefers handouts rather than looking at the slides for whatever reason, they are welcome to do so. And it's a great way of taking notes, and they can have that information. You should also have your slides online in case anyone wants to find those slides and review them themselves. And it's also a good way of networking. That should be something I add to these slides as well. You should also use the microphone. That's something that another thing you hear quite a bit is I talk loud. I don't need the microphone. More people are calling presenters out to use the microphone because regardless of how loud we think we are, there is almost always going to be someone who still cannot hear you. Um, there's also I would be lying if I said I always use the microphone. I'll put it that way. It's been a while since the microphone hasn't been on already. What I tend to, because it's not something I'm used to, a handheld microphone is not something I usually will choose to do. But if it's offered, I'll go ahead and use it without a problem. I fidget, right? So I I've had it happen a couple times where I've turned the microphone accidentally, just thumb runs over it, whatever. All right, but you should still use the microphone. All right. Ultimately, again, if you want those slides to be as distraction free as possible, one of the reasons for that as the presenter, you don't want to be talking to the slides. I see it all the time where if you got the slides up there, you're going to read from them. If I'm in the audience, I don't need you to read the slides off to me. Give me the information. Yes, the language from that slide is probably going to be in what you say, but I shouldn't be having to watch you read your slides for me. Okay, that's just bad form. Don't read what's on the board. If you do, if you make any errors, make any mistakes, this goes for your, presenting, which is not my focus here, but if you stumble over anything, if you forget, don't apologize. Okay, it is something I do chronically, or I think it's been a while since I've done this, I believe, but I'm naturally just who I am. I'm an over apologetic person. In my presentations, it took me a while to get over that, right? And it wasn't like I was committing all sorts of errors, but if I forgot to mention something, it was, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot this. Let me go back real quick. No, I just go back. This is also one reason why for my style, I choose not to read from cards because it gives me a little bit more flexibility. Now, you could also argue that there's a little bit of more disorganization to my presentations because of this, and that's a fair point. But again, over the years, I think I've gotten pretty good about that. If there's time, questions and answers. As I mentioned, if you forget to mention something as you are moving along in your profession, you may find yourself strategically omitting things so that if they come up in the Q&A section, you can look extra special and rattle off amazing information and facts as though you had not rehearsed them and practiced them and strategically omitted them from your presentation in the first place. That's how to engage an audience and really wow them. So, something that you can be working towards. Finally, and some of these are a little bit obvious, such as check grammar. PowerPoint will handle some things for you, but form from is a common mistake I make. So I'm always making very careful that my slides are on point. Nothing like a grammatical error at 30-point typeface being presented to a room of 300 people. Yes, see this all the time. As I mentioned before, the number of slides, I try to keep it very simple. See what I've been going on here for, it's been about half an hour, 35 minutes, and I'm only this is the last slide, and it's slide 8, okay? It is so what is that? We talking about 4 minutes per slide? Yeah, it is try to keep it as simple as possible. The focus should be on you, the presenter. Keeping the slides simple is going to keep that focus on you. It's going to be less work. PowerPoint slides should be secondary. They shouldn't take too long to create if you know your stuff. Oftentimes, we are still figuring out what we're presenting on, to be perfectly honest, and that's fair. But again, part of the experience of giving a presentation, learning your style is being able to present information as though you are, your ethos. You're the expert. Come on, present yourself as knowledgeable, as the expert. Okay, so having too many slides again introduces more room for error. So try to avoid having too many slides. On the other side, nothing worse than if you have a time limit and you have to rush through those last few slides because your time is up. That is probably one of the most unprofessional things that you see out there, but it happens way too often. Cite your sources always, of course. I've seen it a couple ways on each slide in very fine print. That's not necessarily something that the audience needs to see, so you could have it there in the bottom underneath an image. Ideally, though, you're going to want a works cited slide. Happened to me one of my very first presentations ever was someone called me out for not providing my works cited, my references on a slide. Fortunately, I did. I just forgot to go one step ahead, and that's where it was. So I probably apologized for that, and then uh, went on my merry way. Otherwise, said it before. I'll say it again. Keep it simple. The more there's a tendency to want to pack as much as possible into our slides. Try to avoid that. All right. We Speaking of, and this is not my purpose here is not to talk about public speaking. That is not my form of my area of expertise. It's not something I'm particularly fond of doing, though I do that quite a bit. I mean, several times a week in class, in fact. All right, so a couple of things. The question comes up: are we allowed to use note cards? For my purposes, for my class, because it's not a public speaking class, I say go ahead. But I would highly encourage anyone to try it without the cards when at all possible. In my class, I'm not worried about presenting and public speaking, so that's a little bit easier. Uh, for online classes, also, because they're doing it online and they've got the screen in front of them, they're going to be reading from that anyway. It's really hard to get away from. But it I've tried it both ways. In fact, one conference several years ago had a friend of mine watch both of my presentations. Poor guy. And for one, I intentionally read from the paper, and the other, I just spoke off the cuff using just an outline in front of me. And and not surprisingly, he said that the one that wasn't read was much better, much more engaging, much more interesting, and and I agree. I felt more interested. I hate reading from a paper because it's distracting to me. I find more errors and more things that I didn't think of as I'm reading it in front of an audience, and I feel as though that registers with everyone in the crowd. I looking at the audience when I'm reading a paper is awful. Everyone looks bored to me. Okay. That's me though. Okay, that's my presentation style. Everyone is different. As you practice, you get better. It becomes more natural. It's something that I'm still working on. I counting the ums in the last minute. I think I counted about 6. Okay, that's something I'm always working on unsuccessfully. All right. So let's see. I think that's about it. That's my spiel, and I want to reduce this. There's a couple things I want to go over just as far as techniques. This is something that is worth knowing. If you've never done this before, I'm not going to go into how to use PowerPoint, except for a few features that are really good to know. First, recording. Did you know that you could embed your presentation, your voice into the slides, right? This is a function that most people did not know about. And as I'm looking at this, it looks like it has changed somewhat. You can record the presentation, right? So, in fact, what's going to happen here is it's going to open this up, and because I'm on a blank slide, it's going to not work as well. Regular, what do you call it? Um, Functions. Most of us are used to these: record, stop, replay. I can look at my notes view. I can clear the recording on the slide. But so what it's going to do is embed the audio recording right onto the slide. So, and it won't work because I'm using the microphone here, so I can't really show it how it works. But I can also make notes. I can do all sorts of other things, and then it's not going to record use the camera because I'm using the camera for this. So if you have an opportunity, I would definitely play around with that. What it's going to do, if I let's see what happens here. Probably won't record anything because yeah, it's got all of my devices are using this. So I can just go ahead and stop it. And it won't replay anything. So not, but you can see if I close this, it's going to embed this little audio icon here, and that's an indicator that it's recording. So once I get to the slide, if I'm the viewer, I can go ahead and hit play and listen to it at my leisure. This is excellent for situations like students, for anyone who maybe wants to take the presentation on their own at their own time, right? So I really like this. It is one of my favorite functions, if there's such a thing, for PowerPoint. You can export it. You can do all sorts of other functions. I'm not going to go into all of this because there's a lot more features here than even I remember. So I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to figure out. I mean, I can guess what most of these do, but it's worth experimenting with. Very helpful, very convenient, and especially for those situations where if you're like in my class, you're working on a group presentation, much easier to save your portion, export the slides, and then everyone can do their part, and then you can still rearrange the slides. Again, this makes the file size massive, so be very aware of that. Okay. Let's see. What other things? Not going to go into a lot of this. There was some function in here. Animations, we don't need to worry about that. Transitions, again, not going to be worrying about that. These are unnecessary and distracting. Here we have our templates that are pretty good. I think what else? You can embed audio and video if at all possible. It is best to put a link into your presentation rather than embed the video. Again, that video is going to be massive and increase the size dramatically. So if you can avoid that, great. Let's see. I think that's about it. As soon as I turn this video off, I'm going to remember some things. So that's it. That's what it was. The notes view. Let's see if I can. Here we have the view, and this is going to give you a number of different views to look at. So the notes page, if I had some notes, like so if I go in here, notes down at the bottom, and if I look at notes page, it's going to have all of my notes on there. So again, these are great for handouts. This is how I typically do them. Unfortunately, it's only one slide per page. In this, maybe there's a way of editing this, but it does give you, if you have a lot of notes that you want to share, it does provide your audience with that. There's also, oop, it looks like it had a little, it did record. Huh, okay. You've got your slide sorter. It's just different views. Trying to think what else. Your notes. Here you go. This is sort of a master. If you are used to using any sort of desktop publishing software, you have this sort of master page that all others will be based off of. You can edit this so you have some consistency, but otherwise, what you want to do if you wanted to print off some handouts for your audience. Let's see, print full slides page. Here's your notes page. You can print that. You can just print the outline, which I have nothing. You could print your slides this way. There is there used to be a way to print them. Oh, there we go. So this is another way I like to do it. So the slides are small, but it gives this little space here for notes. So again, this is one way of printing this off and providing everyone or a few people an opportunity to engage with the um, presentation in as best as possible. Also, some people really like takeaways. They like to go to presentations and have something to bring with them. So this is another way of doing that. And if put together, if you think about it, you put your personal information, your contact information out there. You'd be surprised. People will reach out and collaboration. It's a great thing. All right, so it's about 12:15. Starting to get a little bit losing my train of thought, so that's usually a good signal to wrap it up. This has been Together We Write. I don't think it's going to be quite the last session for this semester, but we are wrapping things up here at UWGB, so being going to be a little distracted. So I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about next week, but anyway, if this is made possible by a grant from Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning here at UWGB. They have helped put together, these tools and whatnot to get this done. So very appreciative of them for that. All right, until next time, probably next week. Have a good one, and if you are in the here in Wisconsin, enjoy some decent weather. We were up to 90, I think, a few days ago, and then it dropped, and we got some snow yesterday. But it looks like we got the sun out.